assets have to have a place to go. People want to make money. It's been a couple of really frustrating years where people have just dealt with, everything from macroeconomic to geopolitical forces. And what I think that this market is showing you is that the investor is more resilient than people would like to think. Now, within that market, you see these weird pockets, right? Like these times where only a few stocks perform and everything else underperforms, but always kind of something is performing. And I think to what Mike was kind of saying was, listen, in all of these outcomes we're likely to have going forward, it's just hard to see people really just give up on equities and sell in mass scale. Now, in our opinion, what that means is that you just have to be better at stock picking. So we don't see massive upside coming for the QQQ going forward. As a matter of fact, we see the QQQ, the Dow, the S&P at all-time highs, potentially struggling going forward, just given the fact that the names that are comprising so much of these indexes are pretty stretched and crowded with high expectations. That said, we don't see a complete collapse of the equity markets like we saw a couple times in the past couple of years. And what we think is that there's alpha opportunities for those who are going after dislocated ideas and truly good stock picking. So we think that there'll be an okay canvas. And, we agree with Mike's call. We don't think that things are too euphoric. We just think that the indexes are a little extended, and now it's time for other names to catch up.
Josh, one stock that a lot of traders have picked is Nvidia. You like AMD over Nvidia. And I think this is interesting because the Microsoft update we saw overnight suggests that AI on PC is actually more of a Qualcomm story rather than an AMD Intel story. So why is AMD still ticking the boxes for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I could mention a couple of stocks here, but AMD is just a prime example. So if you think about it, what has really led the way all year, right? It has been these large caps in the indexes, and we don't blame them. NVIDIA's growth has been phenomenal. But at this point, with the stock at 950, near that 975 all-time intraday high, there's nothing here that people don't really expect. So how much more capital is this business really going to attract to it? If the stock were to go up another 20%, it's basically creating another AMD. Well, just to give you an example, the type of stock picking that we're advocating for, look at AMD. It had an intraday high of 217, maybe in March. Since then, the last quarter was fine. The stock had a negative reaction, but numbers largely were intact or went up. And we thought that this Microsoft announcement that came out last week was transformational for the stock. The bull case on AMD is that they can take share from Nvidia. Having Microsoft Azure as a client really going out there and pushing this generative AI hyperscale product with an AMD option relative to Nvidia, which is something that was new, gives CTOs the incentive to just try something. Because if you're a CTO, what do you want to do? You want to prove your worth to the CEO. You want to be different. Every one of these clients are trying to create their own edge, their own barrier to entry, right? So it's very likely that people will try the AMD product, and that'll be a boost to share gain. So when we look at AMD, we see, on buy side estimates, a relatively cheap stock. We think numbers are low now after the Microsoft estimate, and we think that the stock has a lot of room to go. And if I may, it's kind of a parallel to another stock I had mentioned to you guys, in the e-commerce space. So we're looking for mid-cap names like the one I mentioned was Jumia Technologies instead of Amazon. So this is something that's the Amazon of Africa at 1.5 times sales, growing 57% year over year. At a valuation that just doesn't make sense. So we're going after these types of situations, AMD, Jumia, where you have a margin of safety, the stock has underperformed, and we see real alpha coming forward there as a stock picker, not just relying on these heavy index-weighted large caps that are already really crowded.